Welcome to PuckTalkCS. I'm your host, Matthew Mugno, joined today by a special guest you may recognize from a TED Talk series, MSG Network, Weathertainment, The Point, or ESPN. Welcome, Arda Ocal. How are you doing today?
Matthew, I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
So, hockey, I think, when I'd written down some of the topics to talk about, it was right before this cultural movement that's going on in the hockey sphere right now. So, I wanted to hear some of your thoughts on the Four Nations tournament now that things have settled down.
I mean, I think it certainly exceeded all of our expectations. I was definitely excited about it, as were a lot of hockey people in the hockey world, because at the core of it, we were getting best on best competition. But I don't know if any of us saw the explosion that occurred in terms of interest and just capturing the zeitgeist that it did. And it's amazing. Hockey is having a moment, and a very well deserved moment, because talk to most hockey fans and they'll tell you that it's the most exciting sport in the world. And that's how I feel. And that's how many other hockey fans feel. And for it to get its recognition on a large stage in the mainstream, in public perception to this degree because of Four Nations is awesome. And I hope that the momentum continues and hockey continues to have these kinds of moments. And we know this isn't the end for best on best, it's just the beginning. This is a new era. And so, this is all very exciting. And to be covering the NHL at ESPN is definitely a dream come true for me.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, everything on the internet says, and I'm sure this is from interviews from the past, that you were dishing out mixtapes in Toronto, and that's kind of where you started. And from that point to, landing at different spots along the path of your career, now featured on ESPN talking about hockey night in and night out. What's your approach? I actually had the chance to ask Steve Levy this question too last year, but it was before this, like you mentioned, uh, a big moment in the hockey world, like the Four Nations tournament. Where do you see your responsibility in engaging new fans and entertaining old fans alike?
Yeah. First, I want to say Steve Levy is one of the best teammates I've ever had. Like, he is incredibly gracious. He's incredibly inclusive on the air. I owe him a lot. He is like I said, a terrific teammate, and he's very good at bringing the best out of the people he sits on the desk with, and collaborating with people like myself, and obviously working with Mark Messier and PK Subban, and the uh, a lot of what is successful about that desk is in large part due to Steve, and what you don't see on camera, how he is orchestrating and how he is, talking with his analysts to bring the best out of them. And so Steve deserves, he's had a legendary career. He's one of the greatest ESPN anchors of all time, and he certainly deserves his recognition and all of those accolades, because he's done a lot in his career. I can't wait to read his book. I'll put it that way. I'm sure that he has a lot of stories to tell. So, but and yeah, you mentioned it. Like, I'm sort of like the Marshall Mathers 8 Mile, at local concerts, handing out my demo tape of Toronto. I guess that's how I really got started. Just tried to canvas as much as I could, and that's how a lot of people start. And it's a different path for different people, for a lot of different people in this industry. And mine was a long road, and I wouldn't change it for anything, because it taught me to be grateful and humble in any successes, and be hopeful and not too down with any failures. So, okay, this sounds good. Okay, so I think it's of paramount importance for anyone in the hockey world to want to grow the game and to get it in front of as many people as possible. And Four Nations did a great job of that. The ratings spoke for themselves, and is definitely, like we said, a cultural moment for hockey. And that continues. It doesn't just end with Four Nations, right? Every single week, we're looking for ways, touch points, storytelling, whatever it is, in order to bring in as many people as possible to enjoy hockey, discover hockey, love hockey. We want the barriers to entry to be as low as possible. And, there's different ways to tell stories, there's different people to highlight. And these are all considerations when you're thinking about how to make the game as accessible as possible to everyone.
which is awesome. And I think, the fact that if I was a kid nowadays seeing that, I think it would have really changed my generation's perception, I think, of growing up in that environment and seeing the stars every night. I've hosted some fun games on the show, and they've actually gone over pretty well with Dan Rosen and some of our other guests. And this is a Ranger centric podcast. So I did want to ask and connect your love for Star Wars and see if you can connect players to comparable characters in Star Wars and why. I thought that might be a fun game to test real quick if you'd like to
I
try.
I would say Mark Messier is the Mandalorian, not because he wore the mask on on the point once, but he also comes in and saves the day, right? Like winning the Stanley Cup in '94, leading that team, the captain, very Mandalorian like. So I would say I would put that as the first comparison. I don't know if this is an accurate comparison, but I would love to see Matt Rempe as a stormtrooper. I think it would be hilarious. Like, just imagine like all the stormtroopers usually the same height, and then all of a sudden you have this 7-foot Goliath as a stormtrooper. That would be kind of a funny sight. But yeah, those are the two that come to mind. Maybe Igor Shesterkin because he's so good at defense could be Obi-Wan. He might need a little bit more experience, but he's definitely got that on lock. So yeah, a lot of people I'm sure could have a lot of fun with this.
Yeah, no, those I enjoy tossing them people's way, especially when it's in their wheelhouse. Like, you've published plenty about your fandoms, and I also think that's great between video games and I think that's also had a major impact on the growth of the game in our generation is the fact you can play online and with friends with the star players. Now, the NBA has been a conversation around the NHL and with the All-Star break. I personally think, hockey growing in its own pattern is great, as opposed to worrying about any of the other leagues. But do you find that the NHL showing those stars every night in a comparable marketing uh, system like the NBA has, where you're seeing those star players on posters, on videos, on the internet, is just as effective in the hockey world?
Sorry, you were cutting out there. Can you repeat the question?
Okay. Yeah, with the NBA or the NHL, uh, modeling some of its star-driven commercials after the NBA, do you think that's just as effective when you have those stars in front of people every night?
So, like, the NBA is a very star-driven league, right? A lot of fans will
Mhm.
follow LeBron James wherever he plays. It's not necessarily, I'm a fan of the Lakers. I'm sure that certainly exists, but perhaps more than any other league, I'm a fan of Luka Doncic. I'm a fan of LeBron James. I'm a fan of Giannis, as opposed to I'm a fan of the Bucks. I'm a fan of the Lakers. In the NHL, it's almost the opposite. Like, most people are fans of their teams. But I will say this, I wonder what the Kachuk brothers effect will be. They essentially ended up being the stars of Four Nation, particularly for USA Hockey. If you said that they were the faces of USA Hockey now, I don't think anyone is debating that. Even if Austin Matthews is the best American player in the NHL today, the Kachuk brothers emerged as stars coming out of that tournament. So I don't think that it's a stretch to say that people have become Kachuk brothers fans and would love to see them play on the same team someday, or might watch Panthers and Senators games because of them. And so even if they're just only going to watch Team USA games, or they're going to follow the Kachuk brothers and their progress through the league, that there is absolutely a market and an appetite to make stars and highlight stars. We should be highlighting Connor McDavid. We should be highlighting Austin Matthews. We should be highlighting Leon Draisaitl and Nathan McKinnon because they do spectacular things on the ice all the time. So that should always be a part of how we promote the game.
With that, I wanna get your picks for a few things. I had Four Nations initially. Obviously, that's come and gone in Canada. Who was the powerhouse, had won the tournament. One of the best hockey games I've seen in my lifetime, certainly. But on the horizon is the national championship, the Stanley Cup. So I figured I'd ask a speed round of a few questions for who your picks are for the second half of the season.
Yeah, I like Boston College in college hockey. Michigan State is right up there. Michigan is or Minnesota is always a threat. 21 Savage, I'm on that train. I love that. That's a thing. Ryan Leonard is a beast. So, there's a lot of intrigue around college hockey, certainly. With the Stanley Cup, could this be the year that a Canadian team finally wins it for the first time since 1993? Could it be an Edmonton Toronto final? Could we see a team like the Dallas Stars emerge in the final? Could we see, it's going to be an interesting trade deadline, especially in the Eastern Conference. That wild card is not going to be settled, in my opinion, until the very last day of the season. Last year, I think it was the second last day of the season where they were really playing hot potato with the first and second wild cards. So it looks like it's trending that way again in the East, which makes it more exciting for hockey fans. If your team is already in or already out, then you're sort of watching games with vested interest because it's almost like when you're in, do or die. Like that's one of the things that makes hockey a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to this home stretch.
And who do you think will be the first overall draft pick come the NHL draft this year?
Uh, well, it was Michael Misa for a while, but I think Matthew Schaefer is kind of the consensus number one now, right? With the Erie Otters, he's a great skater. He's strong on the puck. He's 6'2", about 180 pounds. So, he could maybe add a few pounds, but like he's strong enough to be on the ice in all situations. So, I would pick him, but there it's interesting to look at. We just did this exercise about looking at the previous drafts of this century and trying to rank them. We had a
Mhm.
really embarrassment of riches 3 years from 2014 to 2016, and it wasn't just because of McDavid and Jack Eichel and Austin Matthews. Like there were some, diamonds in the rough there. And I look like at a draft like 2003 where you had a Joe Pavelski in the seventh round, and you had uh, Marc Andre Fleury first overall, which is very rare for a goaltender to go first. So, you've had some very interesting drafts where, in that 2003 draft, for example, like I think the top 10 and the top 30, most of them ended up being, quality NHL players that at least played 100 games in the NHL. So, maybe it's too soon to adjudicate the recent drafts and certainly the one coming up, but there's definitely excitement in terms of what teams will do, especially as we get closer to the NHL draft.
And I know it's news, or I guess the fun conversation today. So I want to hear your opinion on where you think Mikko Rantanen will end up. Do you think he gets traded at the trade deadline?
I think it's surreal that we're even talking about it. The fact that he got traded, well in advance of the trade deadline, and it being one of the most surreal trades in NHL history, just because it's two Stanley Cup aspiring teams making a giant trade like this with one of the best goal scorers of the last 10 years in the NHL. That you don't see that in the show. So for that trade to happen in itself was a big deal. And now for us to contemplate, will he move again by the trade deadline, as if that's a possibility, is bonkers. So I don't know. I mean, we're also hearing that he's being offered a 9-figure contract. We don't know where it's going to be crazy. Let me just say this. I'm hoping for the full-on chaos and Armageddon because that'll make our coverage a lot more fun. So here's hoping that the rumor mill swirls around Mikko Rantanen until the bitter end.
Hopefully next week we'll get a great podcast from you guys on ESPN about a situation involving Rantanen. We will see. Thank you for joining me today, Artie. I really appreciate that you took the time.